Thanks, everyone. I'm Keisha Pucci-Haver, and I'm Deputy General Counsel at the SRA, and this is our final session. I hope you found the previous two sessions really interesting, and I would encourage you all to reflect on those sessions before you start the day job, and I make a public commitment to Juliet that I will do so and speak to you about it on Monday. Today's session is about ESG. And we've got some great speakers with us who are going to be talking from their different perspectives and hopefully sharing lots of practical hints and tips that you can take away. Just to reiterate what Richard said, we really want this session to be interactive. So please put your hand up, ask questions, share your reflections, and any comments that you have. And as you know, the microphone is roving around the room. So to introduce our panellists, we have Mihoko Cassidy from Nissan Motor Manufacturing UK, and Mihoko is the Legal Manager, Senior Counsel. Abdus Chowdhury in the middle, who's Chief Legal Advisor, Monitoring Officer from Richmond and Wandsworth Councils, and Adam Woodall, Founder and CEO of General Counsel Sustainability Leaders. There's more information about our panellists in the pack, but I'd invite you all, please, when you're answering the questions, if you could share a little bit about your background, so we understand the context from which you're speaking. So I think we'd all agree that ESG issues are on the political, societal and corporate agenda like never before. You only need to look at the constant stream of stories in the media about organisations being fined or boycotted for their environmental credentials, or the latest public debates about who organisations should or more often should not be doing business with. The result is that organisations in all sectors are increasingly having to consider and proactively manage the impact they and their actions have on wider society and the environment. So the types of issues that we think are probably on the corporate agenda are how to comply with legislation, meeting the demands of customers, managing the reputation of your business, creating a unique selling point, and I think probably importantly and a new factor, remaining attractive to future employees. So, whether this is an area in which you're well versed or a subject matter which is new to you, we want you to use this session to consider the issues, challenges, opportunities and successes for in-house solicitors in this role in supporting your organisation's wider ESG initiatives. And I think this is something that came up when we were preparing for this session. I think it's really important to acknowledge that we're probably at different points individually on our ESG journey, and some of the language, some of the things that you have to think about may not be familiar to you, and they certainly weren't to me when I joined the SRA. So this is really a learning journey for me. So please, no question is too basic. Our panellists are here to share their wealth of experience, and one of the questions I will be asking at the end is just those kind of top tips, what you wish you'd known when you started on this. So, Mihoko, if I could start with you, please. Could you share with us who is responsible for ESG considerations in your organisation and how the legal department fits into that?
So at Nissan, it is led from the global team. So there is a global chief sustainability officer. So sustainability is really key to our business, and there is a lot of leadership in this area. Similar with corporate governance as well. We have a team that leads it from the global, but then is also cascaded down to the regions. Where legal fits into this is that in our region, our senior vice president is actually head of sustainability, governance, and legal. So we do work together and report to the same senior vice president.
Great. And Abdus?
Yeah, so similar. I'll start off with a bit about my background. I'm a local government lawyer and have been virtually all my career, with a short journey to work for some professional regulators, but I saw the way and came back to local government fairly quickly afterwards. Similar to the setup in Nissan, in that the responsibility for environmental and sustainability objectives sit with the wider organization. And there are specific job titles that have leadership responsibility within the two councils that I work for. But the governance element, the legal governance element, sits with the legal function. And that can present itself as effectively a sign-off of any decision making, whether through reports or otherwise, for the issue to come to the legal team. But actually, over the particularly since austerity and as a result of COVID as well, considerations around governance more widely, rather than just legal compliance, has become a really important factor for our two organisations. Because ultimately getting things right from the beginning, and picking up a theme that Deborah mentioned when she was speaking earlier, it's far easier for the problem to not arise in the first place. That's the ideal. And if not, for the problem to be addressed early on, rather than at the tail end, where there's the legal governance check that comes in.
And Adam, you come from a slightly different perspective, so it'd be really great if you could share with us the work that you do and just some reflections from the conversations that you've had with the people that you work with.
Yeah, I'm very lucky because within General Council Sustainability Forum, we actually focus on a leadership exchange program. And the core of that is a peer-to-peer process where GCs kind of meet with me, facilitating them in small groups of four GCs regularly to discuss the sort of challenges and opportunities, the actions that they're taking. Is sometimes actually a kind of group therapy session. And so it's, I'm in a real privilege is that I get to hear what's going on for them. And actually one of the things that's quite interesting is that there is an increasing number of GCs that have some sort of functional responsibility, and in fact some have the sustainability is underneath their sort of wing of their GC's team. And actually that whilst that can be an advantage in some ways, it actually also is not the sort of advantage that you might think it is in terms of being able to influence. Because interestingly, it's going back to something that was said in the last session about trees being chopped down in the middle of the night, or people thinking that was a great idea. And so because the last thing that anybody would look at you guys and think is tree hugger, if you're in that position where something like that had come up and you said, don't think that's a great idea, they wouldn't look at you and go, oh, that's because you're a tree hugger that you're saying that. They'd look at you going, that's one of our lawyers saying that. Right, we need to think about this. So actually, whilst there is an increasing number of GCs who are getting some sort of responsibility, there's actually most still, say 80%, 90% even, who have no direct responsibility for it, apart from being that obviously if you're the GC, you are kind of a senior leader. And then there is an increasing number, though, of kind of specialist in-house lawyers who are focusing on ESG or sustainability or environment. And that's obviously really important. There might be one or two of you in the room. But I think that the interesting journey is going on is actually to recognize that the respect that you have as individuals and then as a wider team within your organization. And then you can utilize that to focus on what actually was being talked about in the last session about effectively there's the ethical side of things. There's the things that aren't written down in law, but that the in-house lawyers have a very good both predisposition and kind of almost an expectation that you're talking about what works and maybe what doesn't work.
Brilliant, lovely. Might be good to do a show of hands actually in the audience to work out sort of how many of you are considering ESG every day as part of your kind of bread and butter work. So if we could see if there, only a few hands, and then sort of the people that might be dipping in and out occasionally, slightly more, and then people that have nothing to do with it at all. Yeah, so the dipping in and out occasionally seems to be the slightly bigger group. There are some people that didn't put your hands up. Mihoko, can I ask sort of then, do you have any examples of sort of how the increased focus on ESG is changing the way that your legal team works?
Sure. Over the last few years, I've been involved in advising on sort of renewables projects or infrastructure projects to do with sustainability. But that in addition to that, there's the day-to-day looking at standard terms and conditions and looking at sustainability clauses that is increasing currently because this is becoming more and more important. So there is a transition, I think, and my background is not in environmental or energy, as in a specialist in energy regulations lawyer or anything. I am a generalist. I am general commercial projects lawyer. So from my perspective, I do need to identify when I need the specialist of advice and when I can move things forward as a general commercial lawyer.
And can I ask just a follow-up on that? And so sort of in terms of your client, how easy was that? Do they get involved in that discussion when you say, we need to go out for specialist advice, or is that something that's within your gift?
So on bigger projects, it's quite an easy conversation because the organization is really supporting these sustainability projects. I think on contract negotiations, it can vary because obviously if you're introducing another clause to negotiate, what the clients tend to think is, oh, it's going to take more time. So there is a challenge there, and part of that challenge is to bring your stakeholders along to say why it's important to include these clauses, what we should be getting out of it in terms of commitment from other parties. So I see it as we do have a value add work to do as generalists as well.
And Abdus, can I ask the same question of you, please?
Yeah, so I think the desire amongst in-house lawyers, in particular local authority lawyers, as I mentioned earlier, that to be involved early on in order to consider the project or issue that's under discussion at an early stage is the ideal. And having argued for it, what a lot of in-house teams have found is, of course, that you need to be careful what you wish for, because clients then say, well, come to all of our meetings and talk about how we develop this idea before it even becomes a project. And of course, that then means you're struggling with capacity. But getting over the practical issues associated with that, what I think the focus on ESG has meant for the way in which in-house lawyers and local authority in-house lawyers operate is understanding the point at which your expertise and your limits of your expertise, and being able to identify that in order to bring in that specialist support that might be necessary. Now that could take the form of some lawyers identifying that this is an organizational issue and that therefore we ought to invest in some training for our existing lawyers to become specialists or to go out to the external market. But it's that having the change that the agenda has had on how in-house teams operate is understanding its full implications and realizing where the limits of the in-house expertise lies.
And Adam, from the conversations that you have with your focus groups, sort of, focus is not the right word, but your groups, sort of, are there any common issues that they talk about? I know they come from different sectors, but are there any synergies between the issues that they're raising?
Yes, obviously there's quite a lot. I suppose the first one, let's get the elephant pointed at, is that everybody's too busy. So then that's going to be the same for everybody in this room. So one of the key challenges is actually with the fact that not only legal teams super busy anyway, but actually part of the reason why you're getting increasingly busy is a compliment. Because actually what the business is seeing is that you and your colleagues in the legal teams are providing really valuable advice and support to the rest of the business. And this is part of the reason why it's becoming more natural for the business to look towards the in-house team for support on ESG. And you've got to be careful what you wish for, because then that means they give you more work, maybe, and it's really rewarding work, and they expect you to do it with the same amount of time and don't give any more budget. So that's definitively the common thing across all individuals that have ever been in the programme, and there's been well over 100 been in the programmes, approaching 200 now, and we've got about 40 currently working with us. And so, and part of the reason why that is, though, is that because of the alphabet soup of regulations, which is kind of like oozing towards us, actually relatively fast pace with things like CSRD and TCFD and SS. There's loads of them. I forget them all. In fact, it's not my job to be the expert on these things. And I think the thing is that's actually that those regulations and similar sort of things that the EU's doing, California's doing, we're doing in the UK, etc., etc. There's voluntary ones as well. They're all really well-meaning. And actually, probably about 80% of each one is similar to others. But then there's the other 20% that's not. So especially if you've got a business that deals with multiple territories, and so if you've got something in the States and that's in California, and then you've got the EU and then elsewhere, etc., etc., that then kind of square roots some of these challenges that we've got here. So that is putting a lot of pressure on everybody, and I'm sure those people that either it's most of, like they're doing it daily, or certainly it's like every fortnight or so something comes up. That'll be something that's, I'm sure, hitting you, and they're challenging with that. And the individuals that are really kind of like they see this both as a burden, yes, and as an opportunity. Because the opportunity is that because the legal team is somewhat uniquely placed to be kind of having that everything coming through them and can work with things. What that means, as well as ensuring that the boxes are ticked, and there's a lot of boxes to be ticked, that actually means you can look at those boxes and see if there's any dots that you can join. And those might be things that are challenges. So it might be that, you see that actually marketing are just getting a little bit too enthusiastic about promoting your green credentials when in fact actually that's not really backed up by the reality. Or actually on the other side, it could be that you're seeing that the stats are actually showing that the business has actually been doing some really great carbon reductions, for example. And because some of your colleagues in marketing have actually got now very nervous about sort of being hit for greenwashing, and there's now a new term called green hushing, which is that basically can people hide behind themselves, is actually you could be supporting people to go, no, actually, we've got the credibility here. We can talk about this. We've got to do it correctly. We've got to make sure that we're not saying because this part of the business is doing really well, that means everything is going great on the sustainability front. But it's about that key thing that you're at the center of the organization, and the GCs and the teams that are really flourishing in this are accepting that there's a burden there, and also just seeing where they can join those dots and supporting colleagues, because then it's showing business value. And that's the other common thing that's coming out, is that the GCs are seeing that this isn't just about a legal thing. In fact, actually, it's only minorly a legal area in many ways. It's actually about how do you work on utilizing sustainability to be something that's driving business value. And we shouldn't be shy about recognizing that it can do that. And
Abdus, can I ask you, so, and picking up on Adam's point and the Sheffield trees situation, sort of, to what extent have you seen the need for you and your team to be doing things that are more than just ensuring that you're complying with the law? So it's the doing the right thing bit, and sort of how much opportunity is there for you to do that?
Sure. So I'm in the slightly unique position that I don't have a legal team. I'm Chief Legal Officer for 2 local authorities that use a shared service that sits with another council. But in terms of ensuring that the lawyers that we do use feel empowered to ensure that the organisations think about their wider responsibilities. I mean, look, local authorities as public authorities, if you do something wrong, vaguely wrong, you'll be in the High Court in any event. So the issue is very much live for public sector lawyers in any event. But how I ensure that our lawyers are in the room and B, feel empowered, is to ensure that they understand that they have my backing, that if they have a concern that is raised, that they've raised and is not taken seriously, that there is a line to me, and that for the most part I agree with their opinions, sometimes I don't, that if they aren't taken seriously, that the escalation routes are clear, and that the client departments understand that the lawyer is there to add value and not there to be an obstacle. But finding that balance for the lawyer not to be an obstacle is a subject that was covered in the first session. I think that's not an easy task. You don't want to be using your nuclear option if it can be avoided, but it should always be present and understood that's always there. But as a chief legal advisor, my role is to ensure that the departments that use our lawyers understand that the lawyers come with my backing and support.
And Mihoke, can I ask the same question of you, please?
Yes. Sorry. Can you?
Well, yeah, just so it's about how do you ensure that you and your team are not so much about just following the sort of the black letter law, but sort of doing the right thing.
Yes. So we do make sure that obviously we have to provide the advice and the core legal work, but outside of that, we have a much broader role to cover as a legal in-house legal team. What we do try and do is to help educate the business in terms of for example, organising some training to be done by specialist lawyers. That in itself is actually a very easy way of getting people interested and pulling the sort of resource together, so that we're working together rather than sort of against each other in a way. So over the last few years, I've been involved in organising training by specialist lawyers on specific topics and inviting the relevant functions to those training sessions. So this started off as being just for the lawyers, but we found that actually when we looked around, there was a lot of business stakeholders that would benefit from the same session. So we've opened it up to a wider audience, and that has actually gone really well. And it is a way to get support as well from the organisation.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to pause there and see if we've got any questions from our audience.
Thank you so much. Dana Dennis-Smith from Obelisk Support. I wonder if you could address this question from a more classic rule of law point of view, and I'm thinking around human rights, for example. What do your companies do to underpin ESG with the more classic lawyery kind of inputs around, for example, human rights a massive problem around supply chains and things like that. So are your organization doing anything at all around being more assertive as lawyers from that perspective? Thank you.
I've been in local government for long enough still to remember when the Human Rights Act was implemented, and of course in all our reports there used to be a section of human rights implications. But interestingly, things go through phases, and so that title has disappeared from our reports because it's been so integrated into our thinking. And public sector generally, but also local authorities specifically, have to act very clearly within the law, because if they don't, in addition to the threats that would exist through litigation, there are so many internal checks in terms of internal complaints, internal investigations, as well as complaints to our regulators, which is the local government and social care ombudsman. And so integration of classic legal principles is a given in the sector. If we don't get those basics right, the new alphabet soup of regulations that are coming our way, we wouldn't be able to operate in any event.
Mihoko, I don't know if...
Yes, I think just thinking from a rule of law point, obviously, and when we are doing our usual contract work, we have those sort of standard clauses in place, and we do lean on external lawyers sometimes to see if there needs to be some updates on our templates, for example. I guess from an operational perspective, in our organization, we do also have a sustainability team who does look after sort of wider issues from an operational perspective. And this is where I suppose there is a divide between the role as the legal team and also the other functions that look after the wider picture. So I guess it may not answer your question, but I think the working together with these other functions is hugely important to get that right in terms of approach.
And I think there was another hand there, Carolyn.
Hi. So I'm from BNP Paribas Real Estate, so similar to sort of Mahoko, and just to tie together what the panel's said and sort of an observation from the market, it's that on the one hand you've got the cost and the time of introducing all these new clauses, and on the other side it's like these clauses need to be in there. And as Mahoko said, transition is the key word of like, I think we all know the direction of travel, but we're not quite there yet. And for us, we have on the governance side, we have like sanctions clauses that have to go in there, corporate criminal offences clauses that have to go in there. On the environmental side, in our leases, we have to have green like a green schedule of like data sharing and upgrades to make things more environmentally friendly. But the problem that we have is we have to have these fights all the time with the counterparties. And I think for us, and possibly for other people in this room, it would be really helpful if we had some sort of authoritative guidance of like, these things are okay, like sanctions wordings is fine, or corporate criminal offences is fine, like we have for NDAs, where the market's kind of settled on a position with like the IPF form of NDA is something that is used quite a lot on the market. So I think it's more of a frustration, I guess, but from transition is the key word, but we're getting a lot of resistance, or it's quite hard for us in the market to explain why these clauses are necessary, and I think they will be at some point, or if you guys know of any sort of law society or any kind of guidance or any kind of authority that says these clauses are the things that you should expect and want in your contracts.
Just to clarify, actually, is that regarding environmental, social, or both?
It's of a piece, really, in that, so similar to what Mahoko says, we have a central committee that sort of mandates certain clauses need to go into each contract. So the thing we're getting the most resistance is the governance side, really, where it's sort of compliance with the law, basically, is what it boils down to. But if there was just some sort of authoritative source that says these clauses are fine, really, is what would really help us. I don't know if you guys have these battles and how you resolve them.
I sympathise. In my view, I don't think there is a standard position yet. I think it probably will take a little time for the market norm to be established. But in my experience, I think when you do get a significant pushback, it really helps to explain even to the counterparty the context of why it's important to have those clauses in, and the wider aim of including those contractual provisions, because those are there to guide and to also direct certain behaviors of businesses. So whether that is governance related or environmental, there is that larger, the bigger picture in the background. So perhaps explaining why it's important and why we need to work to these standards could help, and it could go some way. I'm not saying that it will definitely work to resolve all your sort of pushbacks and negotiation stance, because in the end, at the moment, I think it is down to the bargaining position of the parties involved.
Actually, I think there's some important points in here, so I'd just like to pick those up. Yep. Because I don't want to let those go, because something that's been there's been some of our participants who have worked on clauses, partially because it's been very much highlighted. If anybody's heard anything about taking action on environmental sustainability to relate to law, probably heard of the Chancery Lane project, which is kind of like a bank of standard clauses which have been developed pro bono. And what actually, though, has been discovered, and actually I think the Chancery Lane has actually developed this. They're now providing guidance on their clauses, which is on the website. It's just been released. It's actually, at most, the clauses themselves are 20% of the journey. Using the Pareto principle, it might look like, well, you know, the clauses are 100%, aren't they? Or at least 80%. In fact, they're 20% really, because it's all about relationships. It's relationships with your colleagues in procurement, their relationships with the parties that are external, the suppliers, etc. And then that kind of like flow of how that relationship works. And if the relationship is, that flow of relationships is good, then actually, just as long as you're not being wildly unreasonable, and this is the experience of our participants, is that's been kind of, clauses have been agreed to. However, if it's taken from very much just like, here's the clause, take it or leave it, you get pushback. Quite often people just go, I'll leave it. And actually, if you're not necessarily, you know, one of the biggest corporations in the world and you spend loads with that particular client, which very, very few people are, you don't have that capability of beating them around with a stick. So I think that's a really important sort of thing to remember, is actually one of the things that the in-house lawyer needs to be focusing on, is actually the relationships throughout the organisations that you can build, support, and make sure that those are flourishing.
And that very much taps into the conversation we were having in the first session about leadership and building those levers and relationships. Yeah.
So you're all business leaders as well as legal leaders, and you're the guardians of good governance and ethics. So how do you manage competing strategic objectives? So, for example, Abdush, you'll know climate emergency is declared. You've also got new housing targets, highways to be put down through green belts, all of those sort of things. Mihoko, you'll be dealing with environmental targets, but still producing cars run on fossil fuels. So how do you manage the competing strategic objectives and the speed of travel towards these objectives?
So, really important point. Thank you, Deborah. I'll talk about a specific example in one of my two authorities. So, Wandsworth voted in for the first time after 44 years a new administration that had a very different perspective on delivery of housing and how it's delivered. So moving away from just the numbers, but to specifically delivering social housing, and not just social housing for social rent, which will be familiar to the in-house lawyers in the room, local government lawyers in the room. That was a stated aim and a significant part of the new administration's priorities for the council. And they entered into an environment that had serviced a different hue of political party previously, and the whole organisation had to wake up to the new reality and how the new reality would be delivered. As a senior leader in the organisation, the moving parts that I am responsible for. The key was to make sure people did something more than read what the priorities are of the new administration, but actually deliver and show and demonstrate through their work and as part of their objectives, which then were translated from the organisation's values that linked to it, and that constant link to the overall achievements, priorities of the organisations to individual achievements is the key for any large organisation. It's easier to, I think, to some extent, evidence for smaller organisations, but for large organisations where you have lawyers, junior lawyers working on a small part of a significant project, to lose sight of the overall objective is very easy. So translating the priorities into departmental team and then individual objectives, and then checking against achievement of those, because ultimately, if you ensure that grassroots are delivering, then overall the organisation should be able to deliver against its strategic priorities.
Yeah, something I think actually you might expect, being that obviously I lead an organisation called General Counsel Sustainability Forum, that'd be saying, yeah, the legal teams, the GC should be taking leaps and bounds to drive this forward like rapidly. No. The interesting thing is actually the scale of the challenge that we face environmentally is absolutely there. We can't hide from that. But counterintuitively, it's actually much more important to be focusing on taking baby steps to begin with. And actually, at certain times when you're super busy, just focus on the baby steps. So this is something that we suspected might be the case when we were setting up the leadership exchange, and actually has come through very, very clearly, is that, and we've now kind of literally codified it, and if at the start of the program, the participants who are in their first sort of cycle, they do 3 or 4 months, have kind of like, with all the best intentions, basically kind of somewhat ignored my guidance that you should take the baby steps and be kind of humble in your thing. I'll actually kind of in a metaphorical sense, take them to one side and say, right, you've put 5 main outcomes that you want to achieve, and you've got like the really ambitious ones. Can we work on kind of like taking that down to 2 or 3, and maybe let's work on the 2 or 3 that are the most achievable? And so actually, because what it is that it's starting off by, you've got to give yourself permission to act. And actually that's kind of, there's multiple levels to that, and it's not just because you've seen that you've got to get to that promised land at the top of that hill. And because it's about really, in the first, it's about getting to base camp and then working out how you get further and further and further. So the interesting thing is, I think the organisations that are flourishing in this area are recognising about that. And then there's times when actually, because CSRD deadlines coming up and things like that, actually even if you're fairly advanced, you just got to slow down on some of that other stuff, focus on the baby steps in some ways, and then keep going. So that's, it might not mean the expected answer, but certainly that's our experience.
And Mihoke?
Certainly, I'm comforted to hear Adam's response there. I think as businesses go through this transition, there is going to be exactly that, small steps towards a different future. But in the meantime, we still have to keep the core business running so that we can invest in the future. I think it is a huge challenge, but with the right sort of mindset being implemented in all areas of the business, I think that transition can happen.
It's shortly time to bring this session to a close, actually. So I'm sorry if you didn't get to ask a question, but our panelists will be available to answer your questions after this. But just for all of you, really, it's the kind of what you wish you would have known at the beginning of this journey, or your key takeaways as you've been doing this kind of work and you've grown in your experience.
Okay, I'll start. I think the key takeaways is it's really to understand where your organization is at the moment, who the key players are on the topic of ESG, so that you know where your starting point is and who you need to be collaborating with. I think that's very important, so that you can then build from that. I suppose building on that and then taking it to the next level will be the next step.
Yeah, so I suppose my key takeaway is that if I were to do this, get to this role again and go through the journey, it's to not be afraid to ask to be in the room, so that I'm not called in at the end stages when when it may be too late to influence an outcome that has brewed and developed by the time it gets to and it's too late. So having that confidence to ask, to be involved, to engage with a wider group of people in the organisation rather than the usual suspects that come for legal advice, so that I understand the organisation more, people understand where the levers are in the legal context and where the constraints are in the legal context, so that the first question that was asked in the first session is making sure that everyone knows where the red lines in the sand are. I think that should be a given for the organisation if you're involved at an early stage, so that you grow together as to what the restrictions are.
And actually mine builds on that, but I'd first of all like to do a very quick piece of audience interaction just to finish off. Can I have a show of hands for who has at some point in their career been working in private practice? So some point, might have been start, the end, so who's been private practice, right? Basically, virtually everybody, and probably maybe the ones that haven't raised their hands, you're one of the support teams, like Priya here. So actually, and as a private practice lawyer, are you expected to be a subject matter expertise? Oh, yes. Are you expected to know the answers to all the questions in your particular area? Oh, yeah. In-house, is that in any shape or form possible, even if you're a relatively specialist in-house lawyer, never mind if you're kind of like more of a generalist or the general counsel? Well, of course, you can't know all the answers. So you can use this to your advantage, even though it might feel a bit counterintuitive considering the culture to a certain extent of private practice. It's not completely, and it's actually changing, but is that you have to know the answers. It's actually, and especially around sustainability, you could go into those meetings and go, I'm not sure about that. So could you just tell us a bit more about what those impacts might be if we make those decisions that you're saying, or if we don't do that thing? So use actually the fact that you're not an expert and that you can't be an expert on sustainability. Even if you become the head of legal for ESG, you still can't be a true expert on this, and especially if it's more kind of off the side of your desk. Ask those questions, use that to your advantage, and then trust that you've got that ethical instinct to work with things, and then hopefully less of those trees will be chopped down and more of a livable planet will be kept.
Can I ask you to thank all our panellists, and I think Juliet's going to come and join us on stage. I think we're going to stay here.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm sure everyone will agree we've had 3 absolutely fascinating and very diverse discussions. Across them all, we've heard about competing challenges. We've heard about the complexity of the environment we all work in. We've heard about resource constraints. We've heard about how busy we all are. But I think in our first session, some really good insights into leadership, the importance of role modeling, of relationships, of leading with the heart and our values, and of how professional values and professional obligations play into that. In the second session, I was really struck by that discussion about the need to be creative and adaptable in terms of what skills and knowledge we need and how that's changing so that we can advise our organisations, and also to be creative and adaptable in how we do that, how we source the resources, the materials to upskill ourselves. And
just now some very very interesting practical examples of how you can use our role to advance the ESG priorities of our organisation, even if, or perhaps especially if we take baby steps to do so. And across it all, I think just that general theme of the importance of playing in ethical considerations, ethical thinking from the outset, from the start of our careers as we develop and throughout all that we do. So really, really fascinating and really interesting, useful, thought-provoking discussions to go into lunch with. So before we do move into lunch, just to say finally, we're going to be sending out a link after the session with our feedback form. Please do take time to fill it out. Tell us what we've done well, what we could do better next time, what you might want to see in our next annual conference. We're also going to be sending around again a link to our draft guidance, and I would just encourage you again to take a look at that, and please do give us our feedback, give us your feedback on it. And we're also going to be sending out a link to the recording of this event. As I said, we're going to be recording it and putting it on our website, but we'll send out a link in case you want to share it with your colleagues and the like. So it just stands for me to say thank you again to all of our panelists this morning, to SRA colleagues as well for putting on this event, and thank you to everybody for coming along and for your great questions and participation. So thanks again to everybody. And it's now time for lunch, so please do join us outside in the foyer. Thank you.